The challenge came during a break between demonstrations at the 1967 Long Beach International Karate Championships, not from the stage but from the audience, a voice cutting through the post-demonstration chatter with the kind of confidence that demands attention. "Mr. Lee, your chi saw sensitivity drills are impressive to watch, but they only work because you can see the attacks coming. In a real fight, against real speed, without visual cues, all that sensitivity training becomes useless." The speaker was Grandmaster Takayuki Kubota, a respected Shotokan karate instructor and founder of the Gasakuryu style, sitting 3 rows back with his arms crossed and an expression that suggested he'd been waiting all day to make this point. The room, which had been buzzing with conversation, went suddenly, uncomfortably quiet. Bruce Lee stood on the stage in his trademark black pants and bare chest, having just completed his famous 1-inch punch and 2-finger push-up demonstrations. He'd been in the middle of toweling off when Kubota spoke, and now he paused, holding the towel, considering the challenge with that particular stillness that people who knew him recognized as the moment before a storm. Those closest to Bruce, Dan Inosanto, who'd been assisting with the demonstrations, and Chuck Norris, who was sitting in the front row, tensed immediately. They knew that look. Someone had just crossed from respectful questioning into direct challenge, and Bruce never let those stand unanswered. "You think sensitivity only works with vision?" Bruce asked, his voice carrying easily across the auditorium despite its conversational volume. Kubota nodded. "I think vision is 90% of fighting. Remove it, and even the best martial artist becomes helpless." It was a reasonable position, actually, one shared by most martial artists of that era. Combat was understood as a primarily visual activity. You watched your opponent's shoulders, hips, eyes. You read their intentions from body language. Remove sight, and you remove the foundation of martial response. That was the conventional wisdom. Bruce Lee was about to demonstrate why conventional wisdom needed updating. "Let me propose something," Bruce said, stepping to the edge of the stage. "You choose 4 of your best students. Black belts, full contact experience. They attack me however they want. Punches, kicks, combinations. But I'll be blindfolded. If what you're saying is true, if sensitivity training is useless without vision, then I should be helpless. Your students should be able to hit me at will. Are you willing to test that?" The auditorium erupted in whispers. This wasn't a standard demonstration. This was Bruce Lee offering to be humiliated in front of several hundred martial artists if his theories were wrong. The stakes couldn't have been higher. Kubota hesitated, perhaps realizing he'd been maneuvered into a corner. If he declined, it would look like he was backing down from his own challenge. If he accepted and his students failed to land strikes on a blindfolded opponent, it would validate everything Bruce was teaching. Finally, he nodded. 4 of my students. Full contact, but controlled. We're not trying to injure you, just proving the point." Bruce smiled slightly. "Of course. This is education, not combat. Dan, find me something to use as a blindfold." Inosanto hurried backstage and returned with a white cotton cloth, the kind used to clean equipment. While the stage was being cleared and Kubota students were being selected, Bruce spoke to the audience, using the preparation time to explain what he was about to attempt. "Vision is important, yes, but it's not everything. When you train sensitivity properly, and I mean train it as rigorously as you train your kicks and punches, you develop other awareness. You feel air displacement when something moves near you. You hear the subtle sounds that precede action, the breath, the shift of weight, the friction of fabric. You sense vibration through the floor when someone steps or pivots. Most importantly, you stop trying to predict what will happen and instead respond to what is happening. That's the key. Prediction requires vision. Response just requires presence." The 4 students selected were all in their 20s, black belts in Shotokan with competition experience. They looked nervous, not because they were afraid of Bruce, but because they were about to attack a blindfolded man in front of an audience, and there was no outcome that didn't make them look either ineffective if they failed to hit him or cruel if they succeeded. Bruce sensed their discomfort and addressed it directly. "Don't hold back. I need you to attack as if this is a real match. If you're tentative, if you telegraph more than usual, the demonstration proves nothing. Attack me the way you'd attack any opponent. I promise you won't hurt me." The confidence in his voice wasn't arrogance. It was certainty, the kind that comes from testing something so many times that doubt becomes impossible. Inosanto tied the blindfold, making sure it completely covered Bruce's eyes. Then, to eliminate any possibility of seeing through the fabric, he folded it double. Bruce stood center stage, arms relaxed at his sides, head slightly tilted as if listening to something beyond normal hearing range. The 4 students formed a loose circle around him, roughly 10 feet away at cardinal points. The rules were simple. They could attack individually or in combination, from any angle with any technique. Bruce couldn't move from the center circle marked on the floor, a 6-foot diameter boundary that meant he couldn't simply evade by running away. He had to defend and preferably counter without moving more than a few steps in any direction. The first attack came from directly in front, a middle punch, telegraphed slightly by the sound of the student's front foot sliding forward. Bruce's hand moved in a tight arc, not a block but a deflection, guiding the punch past his center line while simultaneously stepping slightly offline. His counter was a light back fist that touched the student's jaw, enough to demonstrate a hit without causing injury. The student stepped back, stunned. The entire sequence had taken maybe 1 second, and Bruce had moved as if he could see perfectly. The audience gasped. The second attack came immediately, while attention was still on the first exchange. A side kick from Bruce's left, meant to take advantage of the distraction. But Bruce's weight was already shifting, his body turning toward the attack before the kick fully extended. He jammed it with a low block that contacted the student's shin rather than the foot, disrupting balance, and followed with a light palm strike to the ribs. Another hit. The student backed away, shaking his head in disbelief. How had Bruce known? There'd been no visual cue, no way to see the attack coming. For the next 7 minutes, the pattern repeated with variations. The students attacked individually, then in pairs, then all 4 simultaneously. They tried high attacks and low attacks, punches and kicks, combination techniques. Bruce defended against all of them, his movements economical and precise, often countering before the attack fully developed. He was hit twice, once by a low sweep that he allowed to connect, stepping over it at the last moment to demonstrate he'd sensed it but chose to counter differently, and once by a high roundhouse that grazed his shoulder while he was engaged with a different attacker, which he acknowledged with a nod. Good. You timed that well while my attention was divided. What witnesses found most unsettling wasn't that Bruce blocked or evaded the attacks, though that was impressive enough, but that he seemed to know where the attacks were coming from before they arrived. His head would turn toward an attacker a split second before they moved. His weight would shift to prepare for a technique before it launched. One student later described it as fighting a ghost. He was responding to my intention, not my action. This is what Bruce had been trying to explain. At high levels of sensitivity training, you don't react to what you see or hear, you respond to what the opponent is about to do, reading the subtle preliminary movements and energy shifts that precede every technique. The demonstration reached its climax when all 4 students attacked simultaneously from different angles, a coordinated assault designed to overwhelm Bruce's ability to track multiple threats. For 3 seconds, the stage was a blur of motion. Punches coming from 2 directions, a kick from a third, a grab attempt from the fourth. Bruce moved through the chaos like water finding gaps in a dam, his body flowing around attacks, redirecting energy, using one attacker's momentum to position himself advantageously against another. When the exchange ended, all 4 students were off balance. One was on the floor from his own overcommitted kick, and Bruce stood in the center of his circle, blindfold still in place, breathing slightly elevated but controlled. The auditorium exploded in applause. Bruce removed the blindfold, blinking in the sudden light, and bowed to the 4 students, thanking them for their courage in participating. You attacked well, he told them sincerely. You gave me real resistance, and that's what made this meaningful. If you'd been tentative, I wouldn't have learned anything. Then he turned to address the audience, using the demonstration as a teaching opportunity. What you just saw isn't magic or mysticism, he began. It's not some supernatural sense. It's trained awareness developed through specific drills practiced thousands of times. In Wing Chun, we call it chi saw, sticking hands, where you maintain contact with an opponent and learn to feel their intentions through touch. But the principle extends beyond touch. Your skin feels air pressure. Your ears hear things your conscious mind ignores. Your feet sense vibrations through the floor. Most people have these abilities but never develop them because we rely so heavily on vision that other senses atrophy. He explained his training methodology. Hours spent with eyes closed, having partners attack slowly at first, then progressively faster as his non-visual awareness improved. Drills where he'd stand still while Dan Inosanto walked around him, trying to approach without being detected. Bruce learning to sense presence through infinitesimal changes in air pressure and ambient sound. Training sessions in complete darkness, sparring with partners he couldn't see, forcing his nervous system to develop alternative input channels. Vision is like a computer monitor, Bruce said. It gives you lots of information, but if the monitor breaks, the computer still has other inputs. You just need to train yourself to use them. The demonstration had a profound effect on the martial arts community. Within a year, sensitivity training became a standard part of curricula at progressive schools across America. Instructors who dismissed it as mystical nonsense began incorporating blindfold drills into their classes. The scientific community also took notice. Researchers in sensory perception began studying martial artists to understand how the brain can develop enhanced non-visual awareness through training. One neuroscience paper published in 1970 referenced Bruce's demonstration as an example of neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to rewire itself based on practice and need. But the demonstration also created problems. Students who'd watched it or heard about it began attempting blindfold fighting without proper preparation, leading to injuries. Bruce received angry letters from instructors whose students had hurt themselves trying to replicate what they'd seen. He addressed this in a 1969 Black Belt magazine interview. What people saw was the result of years of specific training. You can't just put on a blindfold and expect to fight effectively. That's like watching an Olympic gymnast and thinking you can do a backflip because you saw how it's done. The demonstration was meant to prove a principle, not to be imitated by beginners. The footage of the demonstration was filmed by several attendees with Super 8 cameras, but the quality was poor and most of it has been lost or degraded over the decades. What survives are fragments, brief clips showing portions of the exchanges, enough to confirm the event happened but not enough to capture the full scope of what Bruce accomplished that day. Collectors and historians have spent years trying to locate a complete recording, but if one exists, it remains in a private collection, unavailable to the public. Those who witnessed it firsthand, however, never forgot. Ed Parker, the founder of American Kenpo and organizer of the Long Beach tournament, called it the most impressive martial arts demonstration I've ever seen, before or since. Not because of the physical skill, though that was remarkable, but because it challenged fundamental assumptions about how fighting works. Bruce showed us that we'd been thinking about martial arts too narrowly, that there were entire dimensions of combat awareness we'd been ignoring. Chuck Norris, who sparred with Bruce countless times over the years, said in an interview decades later, "The blindfold demonstration wasn't about showing off. It was Bruce's way of teaching that martial arts is about total awareness, not just visual reflexes. He wanted people to understand that if you only train what you can see, you're only training a fraction of your capability." The demonstration was uncomfortable to watch. You kept expecting him to get hit, to fail, but he never did, and that was the point. He'd trained something the rest of us had ignored. Grandmaster Kubota, whose challenge had sparked the demonstration, became one of Bruce's most vocal supporters afterward. In a 1975 interview, 2 years after Bruce's death, he reflected on that day. "I thought I was exposing a flaw in his teaching. Instead, he exposed a flaw in my understanding. I'd been teaching martial arts for 20 years, but I'd been teaching incompletely. After watching Bruce that day, I went back to my dojo and completely revised my curriculum to include sensory development training. My students became better fighters because of it. That demonstration changed how I thought about combat, and I'm grateful for it, even though it was humbling." The blindfold fight also reveals something crucial about Bruce's teaching philosophy. He didn't ask students to accept theories on faith. He proved concepts through demonstration, through testing them under pressure in front of skeptical audiences. If something didn't work, he'd abandon it. If it did work, he'd refine it and teach it. The willingness to be tested, to potentially fail publicly, was what separated Bruce from instructors who taught dogmatically, insisting techniques were effective because tradition said so. Bruce's attitude was, "Put me in a situation where I should fail according to conventional wisdom, and let's see what actually happens." In his personal training notes from 1968, Bruce wrote about the blindfold demonstration. The point wasn't that fighting blind is superior to fighting with sight. Obviously, vision is valuable. The point was that martial artists limit themselves by thinking vision is the only sense that matters in combat. A complete fighter develops all senses, uses all available information, doesn't become dependent on any single input. If you lose sight temporarily, smoke, darkness, getting punched in the face, you should still be able to function effectively. That's not superhuman. That's just thorough training. He also noted the psychological dimension. When you train to fight without seeing, you develop a different kind of confidence. Not arrogance, but a deep trust in your ability to respond to whatever happens. You stop fearing the unknown attacker, the attack from behind, the scenario you can't see coming, because you've proven to yourself that you don't need to see everything to handle it. That mental freedom is worth the training time even if you never actually fight blind. So here's the question that echoes from that 1967 demonstration. What abilities do you have that remain undeveloped because you rely too heavily on your dominant sense or skill? What would you discover about your own potential if you were forced to operate without your usual advantages? Because Bruce Lee, blindfolded in front of a skeptical audience, proved that human capability extends far beyond what we typically access. That with proper training, with rigorous practice, with willingness to fail repeatedly until you succeed, you can develop abilities that seem impossible to those who haven't tried. And maybe that's the real lesson. Not that you should fight blindfolded, but that you should question every limitation you've accepted as permanent, because limitations are often just untrained potential in disguise.